My dear boils and ghouls, I am Miss Celine, your hostess with the mostest, and welcome to Fantasy Island. Before we get started, make sure that you subscribe to this channel and click that little bell thingy to get notified. I post regular movie reviews and gameplays, all with a horror theme to them. So trust me when I say that you won't want to miss what's coming. Don't believe me? Stick around to the end of the episode to find out what movie I'll be discussing next time. And now, let's take a moment to talk about Fantasy Island, the TV show that ran from 1977 to 1984, not the 2020 movie. The story goes that the whole thing actually started as a joke. Show creators Aaron Spelling and Leonard Goldberg were actually at ABC to pitch a few other ideas that day, but when all of them got rejected, Spelling got frustrated and said, "What do you want? An island that people can go to and all of their sexual fantasies will be realized?" And as it turns out, yeah, that is what they wanted. That's a very crude description of the original show, though. A very tame version of sexual fantasies was most definitely a thing, but this was still an ABC production. They couldn't go all 50 Shades of Grey on us. So what we got instead was an island that people could visit for a short time and live out any fantasy they wanted, no matter how weird or obscure or dark it might be. I didn't grow up watching the show personally, but I did check out a couple of episodes for this review, talk to a few people who had seen the whole thing, and read up on it online. So if I make any mistakes here, blame them, not me. My first impression upon checking out the show was, yeah, I can totally see how this could be a horror movie. The official statement behind this movie is that they were inspired by things like Westworld, which similarly took an old franchise and then modernized it to make it much darker than it ever was. But the thing is, Fantasy Island has kinda always had some vague horror undertones to it. It's sort of an old-fashioned monkey paw story. Sometimes the fantasies that people thought they wanted turn out much darker than ever anticipated. Or sometimes people just choose to live out fucked up fantasies. In my brief exposure to the show, I saw one man whose fantasy was to be hunted down for sport, the most dangerous game style. A career woman who's forced to learn some sort of lesson by being kidnapped by misogynistic monsters who treat women like slaves. And not to mention, there's a whole episode where someone's fantasy is to be the one to catch Jack the Ripper. It wouldn't take a whole lot of fiddling with the show's structure to turn it into a horror movie. All you need to do is focus on the right fantasies. Omit the women looking to be Cinderella for a night and you're good. That's all I'm saying. Host to the show is the island's owner, Mr. Rourke, played by Ricardo Montalban. And honestly, the mystery around who or what he was probably the most curious thing to me. From what I could gather, it's never fully revealed who Mr. Rourke is or how he's connected to the island, but there are some hints throughout the show that he's immortal and that he has supernatural powers. Apparently, Montalban had this theory that Rourke was actually a fallen angel and that the island was purgatory. But as that was never actually included in the show, we can't consider that canon. The other thing about the show that I found curious was the presence of other people in their fantasies. In the most dangerous game fantasy, the people who are hunting him are actual real-life people from his past. People who he slighted somehow and who now have reason to want revenge. But in the very same episode, a man wishes to see his dead girlfriend again. And although he's convinced that she's an actress for the majority of the episode, the end reveals that she isn't. Somehow it was actually her, or a duplicate of her created by Rourke or the island. And yet other episodes reveal that the people on the island are actors, or perhaps other people fulfilling their own fantasies. It's really inconsistent. The other people on the island are what the episode needs them to be, really. But that's fine, because the island and Rourke are supposed to be mysterious. We aren't supposed to understand how they operate. We're just supposed to enjoy the fantasy. But of course, if we're gonna make a 2-hour-long Blumhouse production, then we have to explain everything, don't we? The groundwork is laid, let's fill in the gaps. So the movie opens up with the guests arriving on the plane, as most episodes do. We have JD and Brax, two brothers whose fantasy is to party with models. Patrick, whose fantasy is to enlist in the military. Gwen, whose fantasy is to go back in time so that she can accept her ex's marriage proposal. And Melanie, whose fantasy is to find the girl who bullied her in high school and hold her hostage so she can torture her. One of these things is not like the other. We're supposed to think it's okay because Melanie keeps insisting that the other people on the island are holograms. But if you've ever seen the show, you know that isn't always true. When she finds out that the girl she's been torturing is actually her high school bully, she decides to break her out, lie to her about why they're there, and flee into the surrounding woods, because that was the most obvious thing to do. Meanwhile, everyone else's fantasies are going wrong too. The party boys have everything broken up when drug lords, I guess, break into the place and start shooting everyone. Army Guy discovers that the leader of his party is actually his own father, who died in battle when he was a child. And Gwen, meanwhile, has fast-forwarded in time so that she's now happily married and with a child. Ooh, scary. She has a conversation with Rourke, trying to figure out if all of this is real and if she can actually hold on to her family once she leaves the island. Rourke reveals that, yes, the island can give people the ability to travel in time and change things. This prompts Gwen to remember that there's something else in her past that she'd rather change, and she's willing to give up her husband and child to do it. Meanwhile, there's a lot of meanwhile in this movie. There's a lot of plot going on at once. The Bully twins are trekking through the forest when suddenly a wild Michael Rooker appears. He shows them to this pool of water, and he explains that that's somehow the thing that gives the island its power. As it turns out, Rourke is actually nothing more than another guest, one who took on the role of host when the island brought his wife back to life, and now he needs to stay here in order to keep her alive. But the water is the real thing. The guests can only experience their fantasy if they've drank from the island first. And now we get into spoiler territory. If you don't like it, this is the point where I stop talking about the ending. Meanwhile, Army Guy's fantasy starts to intrude on the party boys. Meanwhile, one of the party boys gets shot. Meanwhile, there are zombies leaking black goo from their eyes. Meanwhile, Gwen finds out that they're actually not here to fulfill their fantasies. They're here as part of someone else's fantasy. As it turns out, every single one of them was indirectly responsible for the death of some guy a few years ago, and now one of his loved ones have brought them here to get revenge. Everyone gets together to destroy the pool that causes all the fantasies, believing that that will make it stop. But as it turns out, Melanie is the loved one that brought them here, and she turns on them at the last moment. Oh no, you mean the girl who was cruel and vindictive from minute one was actually cruel and vindictive? Say it ain't so. There's this whole big dramatic scene where Rourke shows up and says that he can't get involved in anyone's fantasies, but then his wife shows up and says that it's okay if she dies as long as everyone else gets to live. So Rourke lets her go, and then he does absolutely nothing to help. Since the bully girl never really got a fantasy, she gets to drink from the pool, and her fantasy is that Melanie dies. I didn't realize fantasies worked that way, but okay. Everyone gets away except for the party guy who got shot due to a mild case of being dead. But it's okay, because his brother agrees to stay on the island in order to bring him back to life. And fans of the show are either gonna love this or roll their eyes in frustration. As it turns out, the boy who stayed on the island has the nickname Tattoo. Okay, so my biggest problem with this movie is that it didn't need to be this convoluted. A horror adaptation of this would have been really easy to do. Just treat it like an anthology. Give us a group of people who have either really dark fantasies or fantasies that are easy to turn wrong, and then turn it into a whole morality tale at the end. No problem. Hell, I could probably make a horror movie just by strategically editing episodes of the show together. But for some reason, the filmmakers thought that they needed this big twist that tied everything together in the end, but by doing so, they just made everything complex and convoluted. The characters were pretty decent for the most part. Usually party bro types annoy me in movies, but these ones were actually pretty okay. They gave us this whole backstory about how Tattoo's parents kicked him out of the house for being gay, and the other brother abandoned everything in his life to make sure that Tattoo was okay. It was actually pretty endearing. Rourke is played by Michael Pena in this movie, and at first I was a little skeptical because he doesn't have the same feel as Montalban. Rourke in the TV show was very strong and dignified. He almost had a paternal feel to him because you really got the sense that he had everything under control. Pena plays him much softer, but he still has a good heart to him because you really get the sense that he just wants everyone's fantasies to turn out for the best. Especially with Gwen, you can really tell how frustrated he is when she chooses to give up everything, and how he wishes that she would just accept a simple life and not go off and play hero. After all, Gwen has everything that Rourke wanted and still can't have. It isn't entirely clear on why Rourke can't have what he wants. There's some sort of complicated and unnecessary plot about how his wife keeps forgetting him and it's become too painful for him to remind her, so he's kind of just like Kay and continues serving the island even though his wife also keeps dying for some reason. But my point is, the performances in this movie are actually pretty good, and it could have been a great movie if they just simplified the script. All the building blocks were there, they just really didn't know what to do with them. And you know what that means. I still haven't gotten my good horror adaptation of something innocent. The Banana Splits movie failed. Fantasy Island failed. We're gonna have to think of something new next. What do you guys think? Rabbit Elmo? Tinky Winky with a chainsaw? Devil worshipping Mickey Mouse? That was not as far off as you'd think. Let me know in the comment section what innocent thing you think should be spoiled next. And give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click that little bell thingy to get notified. Because next time we're talking about 2020's Gretel and Hansel. And you won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for watching, my pets, and I will see you next time. Love you.